Once inside the dark abbey, Alfred quickly lost his cheerful grin. He moved along slowly, glancing around suspiciously, pressed quite close to Arthur's side. Arthur couldn't help finding it rather amusing. "This place is creepy," Alfred whispered nervously as they walked slowly past the low stone coffins. "There aren't dead bodies in these things, are there?" Arthur wasn't quite sure if he was serious. They were coffins, after all. "Oh, no," he said sarcastically. "There's stone all the way through." "Oh," Alfred breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, that's okay, then." Arthur glanced at Alfred quizzically. Well, surely he hadn't been taking him seriously. "They're coffins. Of course there are bodies." He fell quiet as Alfred tensed up again. Apparently he had. "Oh, just forget it, Alfred." Alfred was quite insistent that they leave after that. "You Brits sure are big on the scary old buildings, ain't you?" he asked as he hurried out onto the street. Again, Arthur couldn't help laughing. The pedestrian traffic thinned as they walked further down the street. Alfred started to slow, and eventually came to a stop in front of a roped-off bomb site. Only one wall of the building was left standing, fixed at a dangerously skewed angle, the rest reduced to flattened rubble around it. Alfred whistled. "Ooh, the crowd sure did a number on that one." Arthur nodded. "Quite. We still have quite a lot of sites left like this one, from the Blitz, you know." It suddenly struck Arthur how young Alfred looked, standing there in shock, gazing into the ruins. "Innocent people shouldn't have to go through this," said Alfred, shaking his head as though he did not understand. "Women and old people and kids and stuff. That's just not right." He turned and looked at Alfred with wide, bright eyes. "That's why I'm doing this, you know." Alfred gestured over the wreckage. "I'm going to stop this happening here or back home or anywhere else. Because we're the good guys, Arthur. I'm going to go to Europe and put a stop to this. You'll see. I'm going to save London." And Alfred sounded so young, like he honestly believed he could take on the world. Arthur's heart swelled despite himself. Why did Alfred have to be so naive, so good, so stupid? Come on, Alfred. There's a lovely park just up here I want to show you." "Oh, great!" Alfred fell briskly into the pace beside Arthur, snapping back into high spirits, but he didn't have quite the same spring in his step as before. Alfred finally slowed down when they reached St. James Park. The air started to chill as they wandered aimlessly past trees and gardens, and couples taking an afternoon stroll. As they passed a park bench beneath a dense, leafy tree, Alfred lightly took Arthur's arm and led him over to it. Arthur felt the touch shoot through his nerves and was surprised by the sudden nervousness it evoked. He sat down and felt something pull tight in his pocket. Confused, he reached in and pulled out the chocolate bar Alfred had handed him earlier. "Oh," he said in realization. "Blimey, you forgot about that." "Try it," said Alfred fervently. "American chocolate's the best chocolate in the world." Arthur scoffed and rolled his eyes. "Oh, is that so?" "It is. Try it. Don't you like chocolate?" Arthur sighed wearily, ripped open the bar, and took a bite. He paused, surprised. It actually was very good. "It's passable, I suppose." Alfred looked amusedly doubtful. "Passable? Mm-hmm. That must be why you're scoffing the whole thing." "Bullocks." Arthur glared at Alfred. He hurried to finish his mouthful. "So it's not hard to get candy here, huh?" Arthur shrugged, discreetly wrapping the last of the chocolate in its wrapper. "Well, we're on rations. Everything's hard to get right now." Alfred sighed and leaned back, throwing his arms across the top of the bench. Arthur jumped nervously when Alfred's hand brushed his back. "You Brits have had it tough for a few years, haven't you?" Arthur almost laughed incredulously. Alfred had no idea. "London is different now from a few years ago. So much has been destroyed after the Blitz." Arthur broke off and shuddered, still overwhelmed by awful memories. The dread of the coming nightfall, the evil of the air raid signal, those horrifying moments crouched in shelters and unable to sleep through the noise, the terror which quickly gave way to a numbing acceptance, never knowing what would be standing and who would be breathing the next morning. Arthur felt a brief brush of Alfred's hand against his. "I remember seeing a film about it back home a few years ago," said Alfred quietly. "A documentary?" Arthur tried not to laugh. It was a welcome distraction. "Documentary? Yeah, one of them." Alfred shook his head and stared up at the sky. People all huddled in bomb shelters and sirens going off and dozens of Heinkel bombs flying over and flattened buildings to rubble. It's like that one in the street before. It looked like you really had it rough. "We did. We still do." So Alfred did know a little of the earlier war after all. His words brought back memories far too easily. "But we're strong. We made it through then. And we'll make it through now. We're British, after all." Alfred smiled at that. I'm starting to see quite a bit about you Brits. And does the American like what he sees? Asked Arthur. Yeah, said Alfred softly, his eyes intense as he stared at Arthur. He certainly does. Arthur's neck burned despite the chilly wind. He dropped his gaze to his feet. Well, I'm impressed, said Alfred, his voice rising to its usual loud volume. Your city is fantastic. Arthur raised his eyes to Alfred's grinning face and smiled back. I know. The air was near freezing, and the sun quickly descending in the sky by the time they strolled slowly past the gates of Buckingham Palace. Alfred, as usual, looked excited and fascinated. Arthur could not understand how he was still so energetic. Oh gosh, oh wow, that's where the king lives! Arthur nodded wearily. Yes, Alfred. Can we see him? Arthur furrowed his brows, taken aback. The king? Yeah. Oh yes, absolutely. I'll just trot right in and see if old George will have us for afternoon tea, shall I? Alfred looked gobsmacked. You can do that? Arthur shook his head, partly amused, partly exasperated. Alfred obviously had a little trouble with the concept of sarcasm. Why don't we go back to the Emerald Lawn and have afternoon tea there instead? With the king? Asked Alfred eagerly. Arthur just looked at him. Oh, you mean, obviously, you're right. Alfred coughed, and Arthur hid a smirk behind his hand. Well, sure, Art, that sounds swell. Only I don't actually have to drink tea, do I? No. And Alfred? Yeah? It's Arthur. Of course it is. But Arthur couldn't feel angry. Sure, he was a little tired, slightly exasperated, and quite confused as to why Alfred was still intent on spending time with him. But he was also happier than he could remember feeling in years, and he had just spent the best day of his life in the greatest city of the world, with a slight hangover and the most interesting, wonderful, bloody, frustrating American he had ever met.